Welcome back to the PHNX Mercury podcast. I'm your host, Erika L. Day, and I'm joined today by Stephen Griner. Stephen, how the hell are we? Been a couple days.
We could be better pertaining to the Mercury, but definitely been doing well. Been blessed as always. How about yourself? How you been feeling?
You know, I had a pretty good Wednesday. I do have to say so myself. So although it was a rough night in terms of Mercury watching, my vibes are still good. So I'm excited to be back here with you guys today. And first of all, I want to get something out of the way because I see a comment from Chantel and she commented this before we even started, and I've been just on the edge of my seat waiting to answer it. And listen, I know that there have been a couple of rough outings from this Mercury squad that we've seen so far. I am well aware of that, and I don't mean to sound like a homer because some of you may say that I sound like one, but I truly believe that there is no reason to panic at this juncture. And that is with the tidbits of inside knowledge and off the record that I have. Like, there is no reason. The locker room is healthy, okay? And maybe not in terms of injury, but in terms of rapport and liking one another, there is no reason to be concerned. And so to answer your question, Chantel, no, I do not predict that they will be making a trade anytime soon. I could be 100% in the wrong there, but I do not predict that.
Yeah, I think something that we both collectively hammered home and emphasized since the start of the season was that you can't accurately gauge and assess this team without Brittney Griner. She's just too all important to everything. Regardless of X's and O's and schemes, like just as a presence, BG is just entirely, she means entirely too much. So I think that context has to be applied with everything that you're looking at on the court. And I think that naturally kind of makes you not necessarily look as much at the wins and losses and look just a little bit more at the functionality. Are these players getting along with each other? Are they on the same page in most respects? Obviously, even that's going to be a little behind schedule from where it might typically be gauged at, just because we're coming into a season where all the teams in the W have seen quite literally the shortest training camp. 2.5 weeks. You got two preseason games. And, you got players coming from overseas obligations. You got players that might have come into training camp hurt. All of this stuff, some teams like the Phoenix Mercury have literally had an overhaul in terms of their brain trust, a brand new coaching staff, brand new ownership, even past the coaching staff. So it's just so much newness in addition to the injury adversity. Have to give this team grace, allow for them to get all of their ducks in a row. And the biggest part of that ducks in a row is literally having the whole roster, or at least the main portion of the roster, the main rotation, all in rotation at the same time. Haven't quite seen it yet. And I think naturally a mixed bag of results in some respect should have been what was pretty much expected, especially given the context of the strength of schedule that they had to start the season through the first quarter.
Yeah, absolutely. Like McFubin in the comments says, they absolutely would be playing better with BG and Rebecca Allen. That being said, I got a text message from my best friend today saying that if they didn't have Kalia Copper, they're probably looking at an 0-10 record right now. And that is also probably true. Like, you guys also have to look at the big picture here. And it's that while, yes, the Mercury's record may not be what we thought it would be at this point in the season, especially when you look back at even some of our preseason episodes, we were expecting a lot from this team. But again, when you include the context of the injuries and the adversity that this team has faced this early in the season, we'll take it.
Yes. I mean, you don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
You can't go back and replay these games and whatnot. So you really don't have a choice. But yes, I have questions about the team in terms of projecting long term, but again, even the question or the answer and template I'm posing to everybody else, I consistently pose to myself. You're not wrong to think about those things. I like that fans are actively thinking about the team, not necessarily in a concerned lens, but just thinking forward. Like, okay, how does this team stack up, and is X player or Y player missing enough to make up that deficit? Like, I appreciate fans that think and don't just assume they're gonna be perfect when they get back, and then they're just gonna run the table. Like, I appreciate this. Like I said on the last episode and a couple of episodes before that, I appreciate the community that we're establishing because they're not just homers, like you said. Also paying attention to the game, and if something's not adding up to what they were assuming or desiring to see, they're starting to question things. I think that's good in process, and I just think the big thing for this team is just get healthy. get healthy, and then you can start to really build out the things that you desire to do. But even independent of the injuries, I like the competitive level that this team consistently plays with. And I think when you have that level of competitiveness sprinkling from player 1 in your rotation to player 8 on any given night, and obviously going towards the sideline as well with Nate Tibbetts, Chrissy Tolliver, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you put yourself in a position to where now when you do have your ducks in a row, the competitive bar is going to be so high. Other teams are going to have to match that or deal with it. And there's not going to be any in between. If you don't match it, then you're going to have to deal with it. And I mean, again, just looking at this team, without him having all of the chemistry and all of the continuity, all of that fun stuff, the level of competition is where it needs to be. And I think the buy-in for Nate Tibbetts, which is something that a first-year head coach has to expedite given the context of the short training camp, they're in a good space. The spirits are still high. I guess they will have a chip on their shoulder because dogs don't want to lose, regardless of who's in or out of the lineup. They feel like if they're healthy to play, that they should win regardless of all of that. That's the space you want to be in with the team. I think the buy-in's there. I think the cohesiveness is there in terms of the trust and belief in one another. We'll see it all come together in time. Just give them a little bit of grace.
All right. And something I kind of forgot to mention is that we got Jacob Franklin behind the screen today producing for us. And so before we kind of get into the game against the Storm yesterday, I want to take a look at something that Nate Tibbetts said yesterday that just does provide some further context on, again, what's going on with this team and why there is less reason to have concern than maybe you do.
You know, 5 games and 8 nights, I thought we looked a little fatigued. I thought the second half defensively, we did a lot better job. The first half, the first quarter especially, they did a great job dominating the paint, in which we wanted to do a better job of. They finished with 38 in the point. That's way too many. But yeah, I mean, we'll look at the tape. I didn't think we were very good tonight, obviously. But again, 5 games and 8 nights in 5 different cities. This is our toughest stretch of the year. So we've asked a lot of our starters with the minutes, and looking forward to a couple of days of rest here.
Yeah. So like Nate was saying there, and I've pointed to this, but I haven't explicitly said it. This team has not had a practice in Phoenix in nearly 2 weeks. So we're talking about a team that has had injury after injury seemingly, because while yes, Sophie is playing, it still seems that Sophie's facing some issues with that ankle. So while yes, the team has had plenty of time for rest because of charter flights and whatever else, they also have played 5 games in 8 days in 5 different cities. When I was talking to some of the people on the, back end front office staff this morning, the trip to Phoenix felt more like a road trip than it did a pit stop at your house. You know what I mean? Like they barely had time to sleep in their own bed. So when you put that into context into how this team kind of looked last night, it definitely adds up.
Yep, and when you consistently add that context of injury in addition to the crazy schedule that they've had over the last 10 days or so, just think about we talked about the shortened training camp. We talked about the newness with roster. We talked about the newness with coaching staff, newness in system, and all of that stuff. With the traveling accommodations that the league has, the 5 different cities in 8 different days, you talked about the pit stop at home and then going right back on the road after that, and then on the road again after that. Where do you find time to practice?
You don't.
Because, correct. If you can't practice, you're just riding the momentum essentially of whatever game that transpired prior to that. Like even past practice, you'll barely have time to wiggle in a shoot around. And shoot around is just is literally the definition is in the word for that one. Shooting around, you run around the court, get some shots up, do a little 3-man, 4-man, 5-man weave. You probably go over a couple plays and just the slightest bit of game plan for the opponents that you have coming up. But it's nothing elaborate, and you're not really building your system. You're not hammering home principles. You're not running over the film from your last game and going over mistakes at length. You might speak about them in a haste type of pace and manner, but you're not going over things in detail. And I think more than anything with that road trip, obviously the traveling city to city with the traveling accommodations, it's going to take away your legs that's in some capacity. And for a team that's only going about 8.5 players deep on any given game, because of the injuries they have, that just takes on a whole different load and adversity. Apply all of that in addition to the practice piece that I'm speaking to. The really only big thing that you have is just going over film while you're on the plane or while you're in your hotel before you try to get some sleep, which is another important thing in everything that we're talking about. So you're getting mental reps in terms of looking at the film and scouting your next opponent with coaches or with the players in your respective player group, but nothing concrete in terms of truly building on the court, which is where the most value with a team that's so new is going to come from. You're not able to build upon any of that. And I think that's something that I'm not going to say they've been robbed of, because at some point, every team in the league is going to have some context of schedule adversity, but they just haven't had that opportunity in the last basically 2 weeks. So again, give them some grace. They'll get there in time, especially when they get healthy. The schedule will be a lot more friendly for them the rest of the way. In addition to that much spoken of Olympic break that you've mentioned a handful of times, is going to certainly play to the favor of the Phoenix Mercury for multiple reasons. Give them some time. They'll be where they need to be ultimately by I would say All-Star break and going into that last stretch of the regular season. And I feel like that's going to be where you can really start to gauge and assess where this team is in respect to the rest of the W, and particularly even more so the rest of the Western Conference.
Absolutely. But moving into a little bit more of a specific conversation about yesterday, first of all, I'm just going to say the score, 80-62. The reason this is a big deal to me, and I'm not saying big deal as in like we should all freak out, but the Commissioner's Cup, one of the tiebreakers is scoring margin. So unfortunately, if this becomes, a tiebreaker situation, this could be a, prohibitor for the Phoenix Mercury. That being said, we've seen the way that this Phoenix Mercury responds, and they can have absolutely breakout games where they outscore their opponents in gobs. So that being said, what is your kind of takeaway from yesterday?
My takeaway is that you add the schedule context. We mentioned it in literally every conversation we've had. It's that important. It's that impactful. Like, truly, honestly, I'm not one that's going to make excuses for anybody, including myself. I just think that's just insurmountable, especially with the injury context that we have. So you add that, and you add the traveling accommodations taking away at the legs, taking away rhythm. I feel like the shooting display that we saw from deep in particular is an anomaly. And you talked about, and you made a great point with the scoring totals adding up with the Commissioner's Cup context of the schedule. I think they'll be able to make up for it because of all that we talked about in our most recent episode. First and 3-pointers made, first and 3-pointers attempted, first and 3-point rate, first in percentage of points from deep. All of those things, they will give you some opportunity. Like, for example, we talked about all of those things, them being first in the league in each of those respects in shooting from deep. That was including the game where they went 1 for 27.
And so, still includes the game yesterday where they went 4 for 27. So this doesn't change anything about the genetic makeup of this team.
Yes, doesn't change anything about this team's DNA. And it also, I feel like, gives them some credence because they'll, more than any other team, be able to make up for any lapse in scoring they might have in any particular Commissioner's Cup game. Because like you said, next game, they might come out and they might knock down 15 threes. And now before you know it, most teams are averaging 6 to 7, maybe 8 threes made a game. They get that and then some, potentially in a half. So I just feel like those things kind of, especially for this team and their style of play in particular, it's going to eventually balance itself out. You're not going to knock down 11 or 12 threes a game. You're also not going to knock down only 3 or only 1 in a game. It's going to eventually balance itself out because that's what the principles are there for. You're going to have some ebbs and flows, but as long as you keep it consistent, you'll find the middle ground and everything is going to align the way that it needs to. I think that's going to work in their favor. Not to say that they're going to win any games because of the way things are set up, but it's going to allow them to score points. And when you score and you have the potential to score the way that they do, you can walk into any arena, home or away, against anybody with whoever in or out of your lineup have a chance to win.
I think that's actually a big reason that the Mercury kind of stayed out of the game yesterday, is because the Storm knew that they have the explosive scoring that they do. And so they had to bring that defensive edge in every possession. Didn't matter how big the lead was. They know that the Phoenix Mercury is capable of having a very explosive quarter and making it a very close basketball game very quickly. So they absolutely cannot let off the gas.
Yep. And that's why you saw I forgot the name of the new timeouts that they have. But that's why you saw the reset timeouts. Yes. That's why you're seeing so many of the reset timeouts taking place between Saturday and today across the entire W in this Commissioner's Cup realm of the schedule, because these teams understand you have to put points on the board. Like at some point, we saw it even last season with the way that the standings trickled out in terms of the Commissioner's Cup. If you end up 6 points behind a team that's ahead of you, you don't want to lose that chance out on that money, on that cryptocurrency, and on just the general attention that you're getting from your team being able to compete at that highest stage in the regular season. And I think there's just a lot of value in that. Shout out to the league for upping the ante on that and putting a little bit more value to get players and teams to buy into this thing that they're trying to establish to break up the mundaneness of the regular season. I think it's a good thing. And I think teams care. I mean, we're seeing it with the volume at which these reset timeouts are being used. I feel like I've seen league-wide over the last 4 days now, the reset timeouts used more than they were used prior to the Commissioner's Cup realm of the season starting. And I think that speaks a ton to everything that we're speaking to right now.
Yeah, I think Nate uses them quite frequently, but I think it's definitely ringing through the league this week that it's a good move in order to keep points on the board.
Yes, we've seen them in blowouts. We've seen them in close games naturally. And I think all of that just speaks to, the value of the reset timeout. I think it's a competitive addition to everything and flow of the game. And then I also just think, especially with the Commissioner's Cup in particular, it naturally helps with that as well.
One thing that I do want to kind of throw a little fit about for a second, and it's happened in 2 games this year, and I actually should have just texted you about this last night, Stephen, because I was so angry about it. But I am sick. Okay, Nate, it's obvious that Nate is going to use his challenges. He is, if they give him 4, he's using all 4 of them. And by all golly, he's probably going to win most of them from what we've seen so far. That being said, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that they use the second challenge, the call gets overturned, and the Phoenix Mercury are correct, and it still cost them the timeout. I just have to say that is absolutely nonsense, and it is infuriating.
I get you on that. I really do. I think there's this trending in the right direction, still flawed in the infant stages of its being implemented across the league. There's going to be a quick evolution with it. It's going to get to where it needs to be. I'm not a betting man, but I would put money on it by next season that they add these next steps to make it make more sense, because you shouldn't lose. You shouldn't lose it after you just you just proved that I was right, and I get compensated nothing for it. Like I get where you're coming from with that, and I don't disagree at all.
I've made a real conscious effort to not blame officials and stuff like that, but that rule is just outlandish. You know what I mean? And while we're just talking about outlandish thing, I'm gonna take a look at the comments real quick. I heard we got Saul in here, and I just wanted to give a special shout out to Saul and Mr. Iron Mike Luke. We got 2 PHNX employees, checking in the chat today, as well as Kobe, Chris. Cade made a promise to me earlier today when I was visiting the Wildcat show, and he promised me he would be here later today. And look at that, a man of his word. We love.
Shout out to y'all. We appreciate y'all. And while y'all here, don't forget to give us that thumbs up, leave us a like. We appreciate y'all as well as this community that we're establishing. We can't be us without y'all and vice versa. So that's a collective it's big team efforts over here. We're doing our thing so far.
And while we're on the topic, there's a couple of other ways we could, establish some community. First of all, I heard that there's a trivia night happening. I believe it's on June 20th. Jacob Franklin, am I correct on that? I'm going to say yes. I think I'm correct on that. And yeah, I think I'm correct. June 20th is trivia night, and I can't say that I'll be there, quite frankly, because I suck at trivia and hate losing. But I heard it's going to be a fun event. I'm sure Saul will at least lose to you. You can't lose, you can't beat me, but I'm sure you could beat Saul. So it sounds like it's going to be a fun event. And then of course, next week is the event that I am obviously the most excited for. We've got Stephen coming out from Chicago. Saul's going to be there. I'm trying to convince Mike Luke to be there, but we've got the official PHNX Mercury takeover. And listen, you guys, there's a pregame party with snacks, drinks, the whole 9 yards. And then, like I said, we're going to walk all over together to the Footprint Center, have a real good time watching the Mercury take on the Aces for the 3rd time this season, but the first time in our house. And I just can't express my excitement enough to you. Saul just put a weird emoji in the chat, and I'm a little concerned that I had a verbal typo, but that's okay. Anyways, back to hoops. I'm looking forward to it though, Stephen. Like I physically can't stop talking about it, so I need you to get on the plane like now. Oh yeah, not snacks, actual food. Yeah, I'm sorry, Saul.
He said, "Don't call me cheap." That's right. You got to talk to him, Saul. But no, I'm definitely looking forward to it. Any opportunity to watch basketball, especially in another state and somewhere where you've been paying close attention to and watching teams and covering teams and all of that, and to be backed up by like Saul and Espo and everybody else that, PHNX is something I've certainly been looking forward to. So to see it kind of manifest in real time now, definitely extremely grateful. And I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of X Factor while I'm out there.
And I hear through the grapevine there aren't that many tickets left. And so if you don't get your tickets now, you might miss out. And I just don't think you want to do that at this point. So that
Doesn't
being
sound
said,
like a
though,
good idea to me at all.
I've been practically bullying them at this point. So like just be there, It's that easy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm so there at Chicken and Pickle for trivia night. McFoobin. I'd love that you're going to be there. Oh, Robbie Don here from the Wildcat podcast. Bear down. Absolutely what Robbie said. Stephen, have you ever been to the Footprint Center?
This is going to be my first time at the Footprint Center. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, I'll be honest. I think it is a really, really awesome arena.
I'm about to find out for myself. I had the pleasure and been blessed to travel to a handful of arenas on the men's side and the women's side of hoops. So I'm very curious I like to compare and contrast arenas and basketball environments from one another. The game between the Chicago Sky and the Indiana Fever was one amazing basketball environment at Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Saturday. I'm not comparing it to that one specifically, but I will say there's a tall task to be kind of met with that. And for me personally, what better opportunity to gauge it than to watch the Mercury going up against the reigning, defending back-to-back 2-time champion Las Vegas Aces. I just feel like the crowd should be at a certain level. I know it's not quite playoffs, but it should be at a certain level given who's coming into your crib and the natural things that are at stake for a team that you might potentially see down the line.
Listen, the Mercury does this thing called Mercury Train. I'm not sure if you've heard about the Mercury Train. Have you?
I have.
I am sending prayers to everybody up. Like, please let there be a Mercury Train while Stephen is in the building. It is, in my opinion, it's like one of the coolest things that the Mercury does. And the Mercury does like a lot of cool things. So for me to say that, I think it's pretty high on the list,
Mm-hmm. I think that's dope. I think just generally the way that the team integrates the X Factor into so much of its promotion, so much, like quite literally you have a jersey dedicated to your fans. I think they're the only team in the W that has a jersey that incorporates the actual fan base in some capacity. I think those things speak leaps and bounds to like the culture established. So that's why I keep one thing about me, for people that don't know me personally, everything that I do, whether that be me being like the captain of my flag football team, all of the stuff, I'm so big on culture. Like culture is what attracts me, and culture is what I like to establish in anything that I'm involved with. So seeing that in person from everything that I've been observing over the TV screen on my laptop screen in person in Phoenix is going to be fun to gauge. That's another big reason why I'm looking forward to kicking it with the PHNX homies in general, because there's certainly been a culture established there. And, those things, like I said, attract me. I attract those things, and there's mutual interest there. So generally speaking, I'm interested and very curious and very excited to tap in with Phoenix as a whole and check it out, see what's up.
And listen, we've gotten this comment 2 shows in a row now, and I've missed it both times, and it's honestly my bad. But Stephen, you do owe us an answer. The Mercury and the Sky are eventually going to play each other, and we need to know where your loyalties lie. And listen, I'm going to go ahead and take a guess at this before I let Stephen answer. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that he's neutral on this because Stephen doesn't care.
You learned a thing or two over this last 5 or 6 weeks or so. Yes. I'm not gonna say it doesn't matter because it matters one way or another, but I don't have any rooting interest in either team. I just like both teams as far as covering them, and I'm just doing my job. So let me do my job.
I just had to address the chat. You know what I mean?
Oh, of course. That's a good question though. That's a great question.
I do think it's important. At least y'all all know where my loyalties lie. Okay. Anyways, but yes, I did see another comment asking us about the Lynx, and they are correct in that there is another tall task at hand on Friday versus the Lynx. The Lynx are a very good basketball team, and listen, they have 2 losses on their record, and granted, those losses are to the Connecticut Sun, who are completely unbeaten, and the Las Vegas Aces, the 2-time defending champions. Now, that being said, this is their first rematch at the Mercury's house. And I do believe that this plays a little factor into it, especially considering that the Mercury, to say it lightly, got their ass handed to them the first time that they played. 95-71 is not, what this team wants to see. So that being said, I think that we should expect to see a different team on Friday. They will have had a chance to practice. They have the day off today after traveling home overnight. And so then tomorrow they will have a full day for practice, which is super exciting. And I think gives a really good outlook for me on Friday. What about you, Stephen?
Yeah, the thing for me with this matchup, we just established that I have no bias toward any particular team. I watched a fair share of Minnesota Lynx games this regular season. This team is tough. This team is really well built. The pieces all fit together well, and they have a system that they play to extremely well. It's hard to knock them off their base and make them shift off of the things that they want to do. So for the Mercury in particular, first things first, you got to get off to a better start. You have to set a solid tone against a team like this, because if you allow for them to come out and dictate with their movement on offense and then with their switching on defense, if you're playing in reaction to everything that they're doing on both sides of the floor, you're going to be behind the 8-ball. The X factor isn't going to be able to get involved to the extent to the advantage that it can present. And you're going to be playing from behind. And you don't want to play from behind for too long against this Minnesota Lynx team. Nafisa Collier, we talked about last week, arguably the best player in the W right now. And that's for the two-way impact that she's playing with. Talk about Atlanta Smith and everything that she brings in terms of connecting things on both ends of the floor. You really have to set a good tone against this team. And that's the first thing I'm going to be looking forward to, in addition to this team having a little bit of rest going into this game, as well as having some time to practice. I'm looking forward to seeing them get to setting a better tone. And like we talked about a handful of times this season so far, avoiding those quarters where they score less than 25 points or less than 22 points, if you want to take it down a little bit more, with Brittney Griner not being around. If they can check those 2 boxes off, I think they give themselves a fairly solid chance. But you don't get to where you want to be ultimately in the end, which is competing and putting up points, because it's a Commissioner's Cup game, without checking those first 2 boxes off.
Absolutely. And something to definitely keep in mind about this Lynx team, this is a team that shoots the ball extremely well and also shares it extremely well. They are extremely unselfish and willing to do whatever it takes to get the win, and they don't care what the stat sheet says about them as individuals. And that's even down to their MVP caliber player, Nafisa Collier.
Yes. And that speaks to, again, like I talked about, just a team that is just extremely cohesive. Fairly brand new pieces are around the horn for this team, but again, they just all fit together so well, and they're healthy. And I think that matters, especially at this early point in the regular season while they're establishing their foundation. And if you just look at some of the numbers with this team, you talked about them sharing it well. I talked about their movement on offense of players and of the ball and the sharing of it and how it creates advantages for them. Assists per game, they're first. Assisted shot rate, they're first. There's like these little things with this team in terms of just movement. They just do it, and they do it organically. There's no agenda or script with how they're playing. They're just playing and read and react off of the principles setting their offense. They know who's who. They know who's good at what and who's not as good at what from particular points on the floor, and they play to that. And something else I spoke to going into the game against the Seattle Storm, Now, naturally, Neko Gumake ended up being ruled out just prior to game time with they said it was something pertaining to her eye. We hope she gets better soon. But the Minnesota Lynx, not unlike the Seattle Storm, and pretty much even more so than the Seattle Storm, they play 2 5-out offense in a way that it puts so much strain on your defense. So again, we talked about with the Seattle Storm, the rotations for the Mercury have to be more solid, more cohesive, more together. It's going to take on even more precedent going up against the Minnesota Lynx team that they're going to be seeing now tomorrow. And I think they just have to nail the little things within all of that on Friday, excuse me.
Something, I think we talk a lot about with the Phoenix Mercury is when you're playing them, you kind of do have to pick your poison because everybody on the floor can shoot the ball. And that even more so goes for the Minnesota Lynx. Everyone on the floor at all times, and that goes for their bench, can shoot that basketball and it at a high rate. So it's definitely going to be a game that they're going to have to bring, their A game. And like Stephen was saying, get the X factor involved, stay ahead and not be reactionary the entire game. And they definitely have an opportunity to stay, and keep that game.
Yep, and I think this is going to be a good test for the Phoenix Mercury. I think they have that level of competitiveness that sprinkles from top to bottom of the roster that they're not going to want to come out and lose to this team twice within essentially a week. Was it 7 days? They played last Friday, so it will have been exactly 7 days. They're not going to want to lose to the same team within 7 days. And I just think they're going to come out with a certain type of competitiveness that we haven't necessarily seen because of the context that we talked about in the opening of the show. And I'm really looking forward to just watching that first handful of minutes of this game, seeing what the energy is like with this team. If they can win that race to the first time out, I'm really big on that in terms of teams setting the tone. If they can win that race to the first time out, force Cheryl Reeve to call a timeout and pull one out of her pocket, I think they'll be in a good place. I think that's something that they can build off of. And I think it's something that'll naturally get the X factor involved. And I think that's important for this team being back at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think this team is going to come out with the extra chip on their shoulder on Friday. Like we have, talked about all episode, like having a practice and having that ability to give Nate a few minutes to just incite some confidence and, will into this team that has maybe, gotten a little lax and tired over the last 8 days or so. I definitely think that it's definitely going to be a good game from the Mercury.
It should be. I think all of those things matter. And I think another element of this game is going to be crashing the glass. Nate's spoken ad nauseum this season about rebounding, about gang rebounding in particular. I think that's going to be important in process because if they have that baked into their foundation when Brittney Griner does return, that'll naturally keep them in a space to where they're not over-reliant on solely Brittney grabbing rebounds. And applying that context particularly to this game against the Minnesota Lynx, they get on the glass. And I think that's something that they did not have great success with last season. It's something that I was curious about with them going with a little bit smaller of a starting lineup into this season, if they would be able to address that issue. I mean, they had Nafisa Collier, 11.3 rebounds, 11.3 rebounds. Next player.
She's averaging a double-double, by the way.
Yes, she's almost averaging a double-double just with defensive rebounds alone. 8 defensive rebounds a game. So
when we say dog capital D, we are talking about Nafisa Collier.
Yes, Fee has been that, and she continues to be that, and she looks like even more of that than she has at any point in her career through this first quarter of 2024. Outside of Fee, their starting point guard, Courtney Williams, 5 rebounds, 5.3 to be exact. Next biggest rebounder for them, starting center, Alana Smith, 4.5. Next player, also one of their starters, now that Diamond Miller's been out, but one of their main rotation players, their 6th player, Bridget Carlton, 3.4. Next player, their starting shooting guard, Kayla McBride, 2.8. Like they get after it on the glass. And it's a collective effort for them, not unlike Nate desires for it to be for the Phoenix Mercury. And I think that is going to be something that when I talk about them setting the tone, those are going to be like kind of little things within that, not just seeing how much they put the ball in the basket or how well they defend. Are they closing possessions? Are they having somebody boxing out and truly putting a body on somebody to make sure they secure the end of that possession? And on the offensive side, Are they just running back on defense, or are they having at least one person attempting to kind of hit the glass to potentially give themselves some second chance opportunities that other teams are certainly having successes with against them over the last 3 or 4 games? I think those little things like that truly matter. And I think some of those moments in particular with the second chance opportunities are what really kind of hurt them in that game against the Minnesota Lynx in Minnesota last Friday. They started to cut that lead down in the second half, and then they would just have a 1 or 2 or 3 possession spell where they would give up second chance opportunities, and no better opportunity to knock down 3-point chances than off of offensive rebounds. And the Minnesota Lynx got a handful of those specifically in timely moments, and they were able to kind of stave off any runs that the Mercury were able to kind of compile.
Absolutely. And I think it's something we saw against the Sparks last week is they rebounded the ball really well. And you heard me talking about the second and third chance opportunity points, and it really paid off for them. And so they do need to get back to that rebounding as a group mindset. And it's obviously gotten a little lax in the last game or two. Mm-hmm. That being said, I'm seeing a comment about an update on Brittney Griner. And unfortunately, I do not have one. The official word on the street is still week to week, and we will know when we know, and there is no update. So, unfortunately, that's just the way that cookie's kind of crumbling. I still expect Beck Allen back before Brittney Griner, in my opinion. I just still don't know when that is. That could be as early as this Friday. Who knows, though? They do have practice tomorrow, though, so hopefully if you guys take a look at the PHNX Mercury on Twitter, you might get a little bit more of answers on that tomorrow after practice. That being said,
I do think it's important, though, to note that Brittney, the fact that she's able to start warming up with the team before the end of that 5-game road swing, and then also continue doing so once they come back home. And I don't think she traveled with the team yesterday, but just to see her getting involved, that lets you know that corners are being turned. She's starting to do on-court basketball activities. And you can do all of the physical therapy stuff. You can do all the weight training stuff until you actually get back on that hardwood and you start doing basketball or basketball adjacent movements. You can't really gauge where they're going to be. So it's good to see Brittney back doing those things at whatever capacity it is. That's a sign that she's headed in the right direction. A return is somewhat near. We would like for it to be on Friday. Obviously, that's not happening, but she's closer to being back sooner than she is later, which is not where we were even 10 days ago, based off of what we were hearing about the injury. So I wanted to mention that part. And then I also wanted to mention real quick, the tough part with coming back from injuries, especially depending on the location of the injury, is when it's a lower body injury. Not only do you have to get back to using that particular muscle or getting that bone completely healed, but now there's a ramp up period to where you have to get back in condition. And when it's an upper body injury or like a hand injury or, whatever, you can at least run around and you can still be physically active and keep your conditioning at a certain level. You're never going to replicate game conditioning, but you can keep it at a certain level that makes the integration back into basketball play a lot easier. The fact that she literally hasn't been able to run because it's been a foot injury or a toe injury, that makes things, this adds like an extra little layer to the comeback process. So give us some time. I'd rather come back fully healthy and not rush things than to come back and then have another setback somewhere before the Olympic break.
I also expect there to be a little bit of a minutes adjustment, like from her first game to her 10th game back. Like, she's obviously going to play a lot more minutes after she's gotten, again, like Stephen was saying, reconditioned back to a game playing, standpoint. So that's the update on BG. No, I think honestly, mentally though, on BG, I think she's good. That's obviously just my gut. I couldn't call her and ask her, but that being said, like it seems like she's having a blast offline, and she's put out her book and had a good time on the book tour, and I think it's been a good off season for her, and so I don't think that like mentally she's super beat down. I think obviously the injury is crushing, especially considering the fact that she had just came out of her very first true off season, and she was expecting to play a full WNBA season, and now we're a quarter of the way through and she still hasn't played. I'm sure that is disappointing, but that being said, considering circumstances, I think she's doing pretty well.
Yep, I co-sign everything that you mentioned. I think the fact that the off the court especially with her situations and the context and adversity that she's had to go through the last 2 years now. The fact that the home situation is so well taken care of, with shout out to her wifey holding it down to the extent that she does. She's a trooper. She's a real one. That allows for Brittney to be able to focus so much on coming back and be in such a great space that when she does come back, it's going to be all basketball. She's going to be locked in. And I think we're going to be seeing that all-star level BG that X Factor has certainly grown accustomed to seeing that the rest of the league doesn't like to go up against too often, actually. So that's going to be a good piece to add back to everything that they're establishing.
Absolutely. Now we're going to get to talking about Sunday, and this game is against the Wings, and the Phoenix Mercury will be headed back on the road. And so it's not going to be as similar in the sense that they will only have had less than 48 hours in their home at least. So they will at least have had time to practice, time to play a game in their home arena, and then sleep in their home bed before going to Dallas the next day. I think that is definitely a good way to look at this. That being said, though, it's kind of that same situation, but opposite of the Lynx, where, the Wings handed the Mercury their very first and only at this point home loss of the season, which I do feel like is a pretty big deal, especially when you have the fan base that the Phoenix Mercury have. That being said, though, that's not to say that the Wings shouldn't have won that game and they're not an extremely talented basketball team. So I'm interested to kind of see how you look at the Phoenix Mercury's ability to bounce back and play the Wings on Sunday.
Yeah. So this team is not in the space that you're gonna see them in post Olympic break, not unlike the Phoenix Mercury are at their present state. Satu Sabally not being back changes a lot for this team. But independent of that, we know who's going to be there for that team. And that's the player that dropped 40 the last time that they went up against each other.
And she is still the leading scorer in the WNBA. So
correct. It's been pretty much, there's the shift from Kalia being the leading scorer to Erika being the leading scorer. Pretty much at the point of that game, that pretty much turned the tide in terms of the scoring. That being said, have to game plan discipline wise be locked in and be able to, you're never going to shut down or take away Erika, but you want to take away certain things from her. Like, okay, you might be able to get to your step backs, but you're not going to get your drives, and you're not going to be able to facilitate to the extent that you might desire to. So if all you're shooting is step backs, that's going to be the shot that you're going to have to consistently live with, and we're going to work through everything else. I think they have to be more sharp in their game plan. They can't let her just run rampant like she did in that prior game. And by that same measure, one of the weaknesses for the Dallas Wings defense is conceding on volume 3-point opportunities. They don't defend the 3-point line all that well. Obviously, naturally, a strength of the Phoenix Mercury is that they're the best 3-point shooting team in the W. So you have to be able to handle your business on the defensive side of things for the strength of your offense to have the impact that you desire for it too. And that game plan discipline and defending Erika and then giving yourself those opportunities by way of doing so on the offensive side, giving yourself opportunities in transition to play off of turnovers and that type of thing is going to be important. And if they can, I feel like if they can execute to their game plan to the extent that they've shown that they can against that particular team, that 3-point shooting is going to be an opportunity and outlet for them to make up for the inevitable deficit that's going to come on the glass. Because again, without Brittney Griner, you're just not going to out-rebound the Dallas Wings. Even with Brittney, even with Brittney, you're almost never going to out-rebound that team. That's just completely baked into they're going to get this portion of any game up against the Dallas Wings. So figuring out how to chip away on the margins and win at other aspects of the game is where you can execute. They knocked down 13 threes like they're more than capable of. They even knocked down 10 or 9. That might just be enough to sway things enough in their favor. Definitely curious where your mind is with that matchup after seeing that last game, because I know you were not happy with the efforts and how things turned out in that one. So I'm curious, what's your temperature check heading into this game, and what do you think is going to happen in it?
Listen, to speak to a little bit of the rebounding battle regarding the Dallas Wings, I personally don't think Latricia Trammell sits up late at night thinking about missed shots. I don't think she ever thinks about that. But I think if they got out rebounded, she would be up all night. So that they're just not going to out rebound the Wings. That's just not the reality of what's going to happen on Sunday. That being said, it's going to be I think that game in Phoenix kind of at times had, although it was not exactly a close game, it did have the feeling at times of a shootout. And I think that this game on Sunday is going to mirror that. I think that hopefully having come off, hopefully a home win, they are going to feel a little more hot and icy on that shooting, and it's going to be a little bit more competitive in terms of maybe one of the Mercury players gets closer to 40 than maybe a Wings player, maybe. So that's what I'm kind of hoping for, is that they can kind of find their spacing at home again on Friday, and they can carry that over to that game on Sunday against the Wings. I think this game against the Wings on Friday is much more important to this Mercury team than I think the game against the Lynx is. I think the Lynx is a much more winnable game, at least seemingly to me. But the Wings, because of just the makeup of the team, the genetic makeup and how the team is built, that team just feels like such a big, more daunting team for this Phoenix Mercury squad, especially without Brittney Griner to kind of hold off to Aaron McCowan and Howard. Help me. Howard. Natasha. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Natasha Howard. So, like, in order to hold off those two in the paint together, you need something, and we just don't have that right now as the Phoenix Mercury. So, that being said, this team, rebounding as a whole and fighting as a team is much more important on Sunday, in my opinion, than on Friday.
And the other name within that, with their rebounding efforts, is Kalani Brown. She's a problem. All three of those players are a problem.
Let me not forget nothing.
I got you. No. I got you. It's teamwork. I got you. I almost turned it over, but I was able to save it before it went to the backcourt. I got you. I'm here for you.
Well, I was like, I kept wanting to say Ryan Howard, and I'm like, we're talking about a different team here. Like, I've been looking at the 3-on-3 stuff today. Did you see the 3-on-3 team?
Yes.
I feel very happy for Ryan Howard. I feel like she is going to be throwing him down. You know, in fact, I saw a comment earlier. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Ryan Howard can dunk, right?
I don't know if Ryan can dunk, to be honest. I'm not 100% sure.
I'm gonna do some digging on that, because
I know she can get a bucket from everywhere on the court whenever she wants to.
Yeah, if y'all didn't watch the Dallas Dream when they visited the Mercury, you should have, because Ryan Howard put on a master class in shooting. So, you know, there is that. That being said, we got another comment from Mr. Jake. Speaking of Ka, I know the schedule has been rough, but how do they get her back to her form? She's been off for, listen, in regards to Kalia in particular, and I think if you've watched really closely, you can definitely tell the girl is coming off of a sickness, and you can see it in her face. And every time she comes out from a timeout, from being sat on the bench, you can see it on her face that she's just not all the way better from whatever flu or whatever was going around the team. I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think that the shooting drought that we're seeing, I say as she had 19 points yesterday, that we're seeing from Kalia Copper is because of her. I think it's just she is coming off of sickness, and it's really affected her.
Yep, I think that pretty much sums it up right there. Whatever that bug is that was going around the team, definitely has gotten to her, and she's paying her bid right now. I think she'll be fine in time. The traveling obviously doesn't help with any of that either, but
hopefully they got some Dayquil, and they can
some Dayquil and some NyQuil. I think she'll be fine though. Yes. I think she'll be fine though. And anytime, I think the other big thing with where the Mercury are right now, they gotta make sure they get back to their identity on offense. I feel like we've seen it waver a bit too much, and not necessarily just 3-point shooting. I'm talking about having a 3-point shooting, but also having a movement, keeping a mix of those drives where obviously not Diana necessarily getting downhill as consistently as she did when she was younger, but you got Kalia, you got Sophie that's been chipping in on the drives lately. Obviously, you still got Natasha Cloud. We talked about how important Suge Sutton is. We've also talked about how important it is for that front court group to finish off of the opportunities that those players that I mentioned are able to create. They got to get back to where they're having their side-to-side movement in addition to them getting up those 3-point attempts, and then not just being we run 1 or 2 actions and now we're late in the shot clock and now we got to generate a 3-point opportunity that's going to be heavily contested because we only got so much time on the clock. They got to get back to where they're scoring in the floor of their offense. And I think that's naturally going to come with them getting more stops more consistently. But they have to get back to where they're scoring, because if they're not scoring, especially with them being flawed with the roster in terms of injuries right now, they're going to consistently be working uphill. And this team does not need to be working uphill with the way that they can score and scoring droves even more so. So them getting back to their offensive identity should play to their defense, meaning that they're not having to play with their defense not being set. You score, the defense or the opponents have to take the ball out, keep your defense set. And I think that's where they can start getting back to that team that we saw about 10 or 11 days ago, where they looked a little bit more balanced.
Absolutely. And I think that something we're all forgetting here is that this team is made or broken in the defense. And I don't think we've seen that same defensive energy through these last, I'll say, 3 to 4 games. I think we saw it against the Sun in spurts, but through these last 4 games in particular, we just have not seen that same defensive energy from this team that we saw in the early part of the season. That team that beat the Aces had a certain defensive edge that the team has certainly lacked. And I do believe that most of it is due to fatigue. But I think, having been back home, hopefully getting a win on Friday, hopefully helps to kind of bring things back to a mellow balance on the squad.
Yep. And that's a great point. That last game against the Dallas Wings, they gave up 107 points. Dallas Wings shot 52% from 2 and 50% from 3. And they knocked down 10 attempts on 20. They knocked down 10 of their 20 attempts from deep. That can't happen in terms of them being effective on defense, because when this Mercury team is hitting their pieces that they need to, the notes they need to on defense, they're taking away the 3-point line with consistently forcing teams to take twos, and naturally looking at their comprehensive process. If you're forcing your opponents to take a lot of twos and you're taking threes at 7 to 10 attempts more than your opponents are, and you knock down your average, that means you're putting yourself in a position to have a 2-possession lead once you get to late games. And then the last 2 minutes of games become a game in and of itself based off of the flow of things. I think that's where they want to be. They just have to get back to that space to where they're defending and they're hitting those notes that they need to on that end. And to that point in particular, some of their rotations have been a half step to a full step just behind schedule. And speaking to the rotations, the only reason they've had to be in rotation so consistently is because they haven't contained the ball so well from the perimeter. And that's something that is supposed to be a strength of this team, to be able to have multiple players that can guard their individual yards. Someone's able to guard their yard at the point of attack. That means the help isn't engaged. Everybody keeps the defensive shell intact. And now you're forcing teams again to take the shots that you desire for them to take, rather than them generating wide open opportunities, the likes that we've seen the last 3-4 games, like you talked about. And I feel like excluding that second quarter against the Los Angeles Sparks, you can even say the first quarter to an extent, but especially that second quarter where they gave up just 7 points. Outside of that window of that game, it's been really highs and lows. 6 or 7 possessions in a row of solid defense, and then 10 that just aren't up to snuff. They got to find that middle ground and stay consistent with it. Again, I think they desire to be there. I think they have the chance to be there. I think they have an opportunity to do so against the teams that are coming the next couple of games. They just got to go out and execute and make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, all that being said, Stephen, I am really, 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 really excited for you to come out to Phoenix next weekend and be in the Footprint Center with us and the X Factor and Saul, and maybe even Cade will come, the Wildcat hater, Sun Devil lover. Maybe I converted him into a Mercury lover today. That's the hope anyways. He did mention in the chat, though, that he would like to see a snake draft of all-time Mercury players. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that would be fun.
Okay.
That would be something different.
We're only having one show next week, so I'm telling him that maybe in 2 weeks we could do a little snake draft situation. What are your thoughts?
That might be a good idea. That's something like a little change of pace. I got some names already popping in my head.
Yeah,
I think it'll be fun.
Steven's gonna pull out the trivia gauntlet on me, and this.
That means
my
do your
age
homework.
Is going to show very heavily.
You just got to do your homework. That's all.
I'm gonna be typing at lightning speed, you guys. Anyways, but I'm looking forward to that. I think if we can pull Cade back in here in 2 weeks for a snake draft, I think we can pretty much do anything and get anybody to watch the show. So I think a huge dub for us. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a huge dub, and I'm already calling dibs on DeWanna Bonner. I don't want to hear it. I'm not arguing. I'm letting it be known now. I can have at it with everything else. I got dibs on DeWanna.
Okay, I draft first, but you get DeWanna. That sound like a solid plan?
I'm with it.
Okay. All right. I like this plan. Okay. I'm putting it in the calendar now, just so you know.
Sounds good
That
to
being
me.
said, I think we've done some really, really great work today, and I am really looking forward to not tomorrow's game. Tomorrow's Thursday. I'm really looking
Mhm.
forward to at least watching the Sky tomorrow, then watching your show, and then watching the Mercury. Is that how my next few days are gonna go?
It might. Stay tuned.
Okay, I'll be watching. McFubin, thanks for watching. Kobe, thanks for watching. Everybody else, thanks for watching. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. 5-star comment. Stephen, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at StayTrueS.3. You can find me on YouTube at Stephen Prejean Garner 3. Posting up on YouTube a lot more consistently, trying to build up the content on that side of things. So definitely tap in with me. We'll have some written Mercury content coming relatively soon. Hopefully before I make the trip out to Phoenix. So that's the desire. Hold me to that. I got some fun ideas coming. Just gotta make sure I commit to them. And we appreciate y'all. I don't think we can say that enough. We truly do appreciate y'all for tapping in with us, for supporting the team, supporting us the same. Let's continue to clean up discourse around here.
I texted Steven after the show was over on Monday, and I literally had tears in my eyes because why are y'all so awesome and cool and fun? And like, you look in a lot of the WNBA communities around the country right now, and it's not exactly a pretty place to be. And so I just really want to say again, like Steven said, how much we appreciate just the overall energy and vibes that y'all bring. It doesn't go unnoticed, and we really appreciate y'all keeping it, positive and kosher in here, if you will.
Yep.
That being said, like I said, there is a practice tomorrow, and I will be hopefully posting some clips from practice. I won't be at practice, so you'll just get the presser clips, but you will get something from me. So no practice clips. Sorry about that, but unfortunately, Erika has to work. So just head over to the PHNX_Mercury Twitter account for that. And if you're not following me on Twitter at Erika with a K Lee Day, that's also a huge mistake on your part. But other than that, we will see you next Monday, and that's it. Bye.
We all silly like the mayor.